All slaves were sold. Only one Apache woman was left behind, and only a rancher bought the worthless. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The sky above Lobo Crossing had the flat, colorless look of winter when the sun was out, but giving no warmth. It was late morning, but the frost still clung to the earth like it had nowhere else to go. The trading yard sat quiet now, most of the men having already left with their wagons full and coin bags lightened. The wooden pens, once filled with frightened movement, now stood mostly empty. Only one remained occupied. She sat in the far corner of the last stock pen, her knees pulled close, her bare feet tucked under her. Her long black hair hung in loose strands across her face. A streak of dried blood ran from the edge of her mouth to her jawline. Her wrists were bound together with rawhide tight enough to cut. The deerskin dress she wore was ripped down the side and torn across the chest. Her skin was bruised across the collarbone, along her shoulder and around the ankles where she'd been dragged earlier. She didn't cry, didn't plead, just watched from the corner of the pen, her breathing steady, her chin raised like she wasn't afraid of any of them. The traders had stopped trying. Too wild, one had muttered, bit me hard enough to draw blood. Another man laughed about how she spat at him. One more called her worthless for not kneeling when told. They left her there, the one no one bought. Gideon Kane stood off near the post-feed shed, arms folded across his chest, a few paces from his wagon. He hadn't planned to be here long. He came to pick up a few things, grain, new leather straps, a hinge for the barn door, the kind of errands he did maybe twice a season. He didn't come to look at women. He never had, not since the last time 5 years ago when he buried both his wife and his boy within a week of each other on frozen ground and stopped speaking to God or anyone else. He was a tall man, built heavy from years of work, the kind of frame that used to wear a blue cavalry coat with bars on the shoulder, though that coat was long gone. Now he wore a worn canvas coat, a dull gray scarf, and gloves patched in 3 places. His Stetson was pulled low, snow-dusted across the brim. The scar down his left forearm always ached this time of year, but he'd learned to ignore it. He didn't know what kept his eyes on her. It wasn't pity. He didn't feel that anymore. Not the real kind. And it wasn't lust, not the kind the other men had in their eyes when they laughed and spit. Maybe it was the way she held herself, still proud even now. Or maybe it was because something in her expression looked like how he felt most days. Alone, cornered, waiting. He walked away from the shed without saying anything and headed toward the pen. The trader glanced up from his ledger, a surprised look crossing his face as he watched Gideon come to a stop in front of the gate. "You interested in that one?" the man said. "Don't bother. She ain't housebroken. Damn near broke Ned's finger this morning." Gideon didn't answer. He reached into his coat pocket and took out 2 silver coins, clean and quiet, held them out without looking at the man. His eyes stayed on her. The trader scoffed but took the money quick. "Suit yourself. Don't say I didn't warn you." He walked to the gate, cut the rawhide with a knife, and stepped back fast, as if worried she'd spring forward like an animal. The woman didn't move. She just watched Gideon, her eyes hard, dark, filled with calculation. She didn't know who he was or what he wanted, but she could guess. Every man before had wanted one of 2 things, obedience or silence. Most wanted both. She didn't lower her head, didn't rise. He stepped inside the pen slowly. The smell of dirt, old hay, and cold blood lingered in the air. His boots crunched on the frost. She shifted her weight slightly, her arms still pressed to her sides, waiting. He stopped in front of her and held out his hand. It wasn't gentle, wasn't a trick, just a hand. She didn't take it. He didn't lower it either, just waited. She stood up on her own, slow from the stiffness in her legs. Her teeth gritted against the pain as the rawhide cuts burned along her arms and the soles of her feet stung with cold. Her jaw trembled from the air, but her stare stayed steady. She stepped forward without help. He didn't touch her, just stepped aside and let her out. The ride back to his ranch was silent. She sat in the back of the wagon, knees pulled to her chest, arms crossed over them. He tossed her a wool army blanket without a word. She wrapped it around herself but didn't thank him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the trail behind them for the first mile, like she was memorizing the route in case she needed to escape. Gideon focused on the road ahead. He didn't speak, didn't look back. His thoughts drifted, like they always did when he passed the ridge overlooking the canyon, to the two stones on the hill behind the house. He hadn't let anyone come up there since. No one visited, no one stayed. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun had dipped behind the hills. The air had turned sharp. His dog barked once, then went quiet. He stepped down, unhitched on the wagon, didn't look to see if she'd follow, hauled the grain into the shed. When he came back out, she was gone. He paused, eyes scanning the edge of the woods. He didn't call for her. Instead, he stoked the stove inside, left a small plate of bread and beans near the hearth, then sat down by the window. He waited. He didn't know why. Maybe part of him figured she'd run. Maybe a smaller part hoped she wouldn't. It was near 2 hours later when he heard the crunch of frost under bare feet. She appeared in the doorway, shoulders hunched, legs scraped worse than before. She looked like she'd tried to make it across the ridge, found nothing but cold and dark, and had to choose between pride and survival. He didn't move, boy. She stepped inside without a word and went straight to the fire. Her hands shook when she held them near the flames. She smelled of bark and smoke and old fear. She didn't look at him, but she didn't try to run again. He slid the plate closer to her. She took it, sat with her back to him, ate every bite. He watched her shoulders ease just a fraction. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes stayed down, but they no longer darted to the door. Gideon leaned back in the chair and stared at the fire until the logs split and hissed. He didn't speak. She didn't either, but she'd come back, and that was enough for now. She slept on the floor the first night, curled close to the fire, the wool blanket still wrapped tight around her. Gideon had offered the cot in the back room without saying much, just nodded toward it and left the door open. She never even looked in that direction. When he rose at dawn, she was still there, breathing quietly, one arm under her cheek, the other curled beneath her ribs. He didn't wake her, just stoked the fire and stepped out into the bitter cold to start chores. The frost cracked under his boots as he crossed the yard to the barn. His dog trailed him in silence, tail low, sensing something had changed. Inside the barn, the air was warmer, hay thick on the floor, the smell of horses and old leather settling around him like a memory. He fed the animals, checked the water trough, rubbed down the old mare's leg where she'd pulled a tendon the week before. His hands worked by habit, but his thoughts were elsewhere, kept going back to the woman now in his cabin. He didn't know what she'd do. She could still run, might wait till his back was turned, steal food, maybe even a rifle if she was desperate. He hadn't locked anything. Didn't plan to. If she wanted to leave, she would. He wasn't keeping anyone. But there was a weight to her silence last night that didn't feel like escape, more like exhaustion. Like the choice to stay wasn't surrender, it was just the only thing left. When he stepped back inside, she was awake, sitting on the same blanket near the fire, arms wrapped around her knees, hair in her face. She didn't speak, just watched him with those guarded, unblinking eyes. He poured hot water into a basin, set it down near her without comment. She looked at it, then at him, and when he walked away toward the pantry, she slowly reached out and began to clean her hands, rubbing the dried blood and dirt from her fingers. That was how it went the next few days. She didn't talk, and he didn't press her. He left food near the hearth each morning, ate his own in silence across the room. When he chopped wood, she watched from the porch. When he returned from the barn, she had swept the floor. Quiet trades, no requests, no thanks, just routine. On the third day, she found a nail sticking up from one of the floorboards. She used the heel of his boot, left near the door, to hammer it back down. When he saw it later, he noticed the nail flush with the plank and the scuff mark her heel left behind. He didn't say anything, just stood there a moment longer than he needed to. She started using the cot after that. Still didn't close the door. Still kept her back to the wall. That evening, he found her near the front window, staring out at the hills as the sun dropped behind them. She didn't turn as he approached, but she didn't move away either. He stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets, shoulder close enough that he could hear her breath. Then quietly, she pointed toward the ridge beyond the barn. Graves. He nodded once. My wife, my boy. She didn't ask anything more, just looked at the slope for a few seconds longer, then stepped away. That night, he left a clean wool dress folded on the chair near her cot, something simple from town, not new but good fabric. She didn't touch it until the next morning after he had already gone out. When he returned, she was tending the stove, wearing the dress. It fit loose around the shoulders but clung to her hips. The neckline came higher than the torn hide she'd been wearing, but not by much. She caught him looking and turned her back quickly, tugging at the fabric with nervous fingers. He looked away too, not because he was ashamed, but because he knew what it meant to be stared at the wrong way. He wouldn't be that man. The sound of a kettle on the fire filled the room, followed by the scrape of her boots, borrowed from a box near the door, as she crossed the floor. Her limp had eased some. She still walked stiff, but with less pain. Her body was healing slowly. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 24, strong despite the bruises. That afternoon, she joined him outside for the first time. She helped gather kindling, didn't say anything, just followed a few paces behind, watching how he did it, copying the movements. At one point, she bent to pick up a branch and winced when her side twisted. He stepped forward, hand out, but she raised hers quick, not in refusal but caution, like a warning. He froze, waiting, then nodded, backed away. After a few more steps, she straightened and kept going. They moved like that, careful, quiet, watching each other without speaking much. Later that day, he patched a broken bridle at the barn workbench. She stood in the doorway, arms folded across her chest, watching. Then, without being asked, she walked over and began mending a tear in the saddle blanket beside him. Her stitches weren't pretty, but they held. It was the first time they worked side by side. When they went inside, she lingered near the table. He served stew, rabbit, and potatoes boiled thick, and sat across from her. She hesitated before eating, like it still surprised her not to be fed last or not at all. Halfway through, she finally asked, "Why me, my?" He didn't answer right away, just chewed, swallowed, and looked at her, then shrugged. "You didn't beg," he said. She stared at him a moment longer, then looked down at her bowl. She didn't smile, didn't speak again, but she finished the food. That night, she didn't wait for the fire to go low before curling up on the cot. And for the first time, when he passed her to hang his coat, she didn't flinch. She just closed her eyes and let sleep come. In the dark, Gideon sat near the stove, watching the flames lick at the iron. The room was quiet, safe, not fixed, not healed, but no longer empty. The wind howled hard that morning, blowing snow sideways across the valley before the sun had even touched the ridgeline. The world outside was all white and gray, the sky low and mean. Gideon opened the door just long enough to check on the weather, then shut it against the cold. They'd be snowed in by nightfall, maybe for days. He set the kettle on the stove and rubbed his hands, stiff from the chill. Behind him, Tiva sat on the cot, legs folded under her, watching quietly. Her hair was still damp from the water she used to clean herself earlier. A faint red mark on her collarbone caught the light as she adjusted the wool dress, the neckline shifting. She saw him glance away. Their eyes met for a second too long. She didn't look away, but she did shift her shoulders slightly, drawing the fabric higher. He looked down, moved back to the kettle, poured 2 mugs, handed her one without a word. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It had weight, shape. It said more than anything spoken, but there were questions building, not just between them, but unspoken ones from those who might be watching. Those who'd wonder why she trusted him at all, why he hadn't sent her off, and why she hadn't run again. That morning, she broke the silence first. "Where's your family buried?" she asked, her voice still rough from disuse. He looked at her, then toward the window, the ridge behind the barn, under the cottonwood. "You live here alone since?" He nodded. 5 years. She took a sip from the mug. Steam rose past her cheek. She was sitting straighter now, more at ease in her skin, though her body still bore the signs of what had been done to her. The bruises were fading, her limp was almost gone, but the scar along her shoulder, long and raised, wasn't going anywhere. "You have no people left?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, "No." Tiva set the cup down carefully on the table. Her fingers hesitated before pulling the sleeve of her dress lower, covering her arm. I was traded away 2 winters ago, she said. Twice since then. One man beat me, another tied me for 3 days. Trader said I was too much trouble to keep. Gideon didn't speak. He stood there, letting her say what she wanted, offering nothing to interrupt it. They called me cursed for speaking out, for fighting back. I was tied to a post for 2 days last time, then brought here to sell. Her jaw tightened. But I wouldn't kneel. He nodded once. I know. The kettle popped again behind them. The fire crackled. A crow called outside, the sound sharp against the wind. She looked at him then, not with pity, not seeking it either, just meeting him eye to eye. I stay because I'm not afraid here, she said. That was the closest either of them had come to naming what was building between them. Later that day, when the snow had covered everything in a thick white blanket, she helped him close up the barn. They worked in rhythm now. She knew which tools to hand him without asking. He knew how to read when she was sore or when she needed space. The dog, old and half lame, trailed after them both, tail swishing slowly. Inside, as the wind picked up, Gideon lit 2 lanterns instead of one. The cabin was warm, dry. She stirred the stew this time. He let her. Her movements were careful, still unfamiliar with the kitchen, but steady. He set out 2 bowls. She placed a third on the floor for the dog. After dinner, she sat by the fire, rubbing a sore spot on her ankle. The hem of her dress had pulled up just enough to show the edge of a healing scrape. Gideon sat across from her, working on a piece of leather, but his eyes kept drifting. She noticed, didn't hide the leg, didn't cover the skin showing above her chest either. But she watched his reaction. He didn't shift, didn't speak, and in that she seemed to find her answer. I thought you'd want what others did, she said quietly, not looking at him. He shook his head. That's not why I brought you here. I know that now, she replied, but I didn't then. The fire cracked again. He stood and walked to the coat rack, took down a thick shawl, walked over, and handed it to her. She looked at it, then at him, slowly took it, wrapped it over her shoulders. Her hands brushed his as she did. He didn't move away. Neither did she. The next day, she used her own hands to fix a broken latch on the feed bin without being asked. He mended her boots with care she didn't comment on. And when evening fell, she didn't wait for him to sit. She sat first, closer this time. They didn't touch, but they didn't need to. The space between them had already begun to change, not through grand gestures or rushed words, but through meals shared without fear, tools passed without hesitation, and silence that didn't need to be broken. And though neither said it aloud, both of them knew something had taken root. She was no longer the woman in the corner of a stock pen, and he was no longer entirely alone. The days turned quiet after the storm. Snow pressed thick against the cabin walls, muting the world outside like someone had wrapped the whole valley in wool. The ridge, the barn, even the trail beyond the trees, everything disappeared into white. There was no going anywhere, no mail coming in, no visitors, just them. Gideon didn't mind the stillness. He was used to it, had lived years without voices, years without questions. But now there was Tiva, and her silence was a different kind. It wasn't empty, it was aware. She watched the way he moved, how he handled the axe, how he kept his tools in order. She didn't ask much, but her eyes held every word she didn't say. That morning, she was the first to rise. When he came in from checking the barn, he found her clearing ashes from the stove and folding the blanket from her cot. Her braid was loose, falling over one shoulder. The wool dress fit her better now, like her body had filled out slightly with the days of steady food and sleep. He didn't speak right away, just nodded toward the window. Snow's lighter today. She nodded back. I can help feed. It was the first time she offered. He hesitated only a moment, then handed her one of his smaller coats, lined and warm, sleeves long on her, but workable. She pulled it on, cinched it at the waist with a strip of rawhide. Her hands still bore faint cuts, but they were closing. The bruises along her arms were nearly gone. They crossed the yard together, boots crunching ice. The dog limped behind them, tail up, happy for motion. Inside the barn, the horses stirred, huffed into the hay. Tiva moved carefully, but with growing confidence. She measured oats into buckets without being told, tested the water barrel, brushed down the old mare's side with practiced strokes. Gideon watched from the stall doorway, arms crossed. "You have done this before," he said. She gave a small nod. "My mother's brother kept horses." There was a beat of silence. Then she added, "Before he died." She didn't say how. She didn't need to. His eyes met hers. He gave a small nod. That was enough. Later, while she swept the porch, he split logs near the woodpile. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, her forearms tight from work. At one point, she leaned the broom against the wall and walked over to him. "Can I try?" she asked, eyeing the axe. He blinked, then held it out. She took it, adjusted her stance. He didn't laugh, didn't correct her, just stepped aside and let her swing. The first strike landed crooked, the second better. By the fourth, she split a small round clean down the middle. Her shoulders rose, chest rising with breath, cheeks flushed. He smiled faintly, barely visible. She caught it. That night, the fire was burning low when she approached him near the stove. He was sitting in a worn armchair, legs stretched out, polishing the blade of his skinning knife. She stopped beside him. "Will you show me how to say some words?" she asked. He looked up. "English?" She nodded. "I know some." "Not enough." He set the knife down. "What do you want to know?" She glanced around the room thinking, then touched her chest. "Name?" He nodded. "Tiva." He pointed to himself. "Gideon." Her voice softened just slightly. "Gideon," she repeated carefully. He watched her mouth form the sound. Something stirred in him he hadn't felt in a long time. Not desire, though she was beautiful. And he wasn't blind, but something quieter, a kind of warmth he'd forgotten how to carry. She sat near him, close enough their legs nearly touched. He handed her a tin cup, taught her cup, stove, door, chair. She repeated each word, laughed once when she got one wrong, and that surprised them both. He looked at her, the curve of her mouth, the small scar near her lip. He asked, "Do you want to stay?" She didn't answer at first, just stared into the fire, hands wrapped around the cup. Then slowly, "I stay because I choose, not because I am kept." He nodded. "That's how it should be." They sat like that a long time. No more words, just a fire between them and something steady building in the quiet. Later, when she rose to go to bed, her hand brushed his shoulder. She paused. He looked up, and without saying anything else, she leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his cheek. It was not rushed, not forced, just something shared and meant. Then she walked to the cot, pulled the blanket over her, and closed her eyes. He sat there a long time after, the fire dying low, that kiss burning warmer than the flames. And for the first time in 5 winters, Gideon Kane didn't feel like a man living beside a grave. He felt alive, and she had done that with nothing more than her staying. The next morning came gray and still. The snow had stopped sometime during the night, and the sky was now a dull sheet stretched tight above the valley, holding back whatever storm was next. Inside the cabin, the heat from the stove still lingered, but the coals were low. Gideon stirred before dawn, same as always. He rose from a chair he'd fallen asleep in, stretched his back, and glanced toward the cot. Tiva was already sitting up, legs draped over the edge, hair falling down one shoulder. She rubbed her hands slowly, still waking. Their eyes met, and for the first time there was no caution in the look she gave him. No distance, just quiet acknowledgement. The kiss from the night before hadn't been spoken about. Neither of them needed to, but it sat between them now, not like something to avoid, but something unfinished. A beginning. He added wood to the stove, got the coffee going. She washed her face, changed into a clean undershift and the wool dress again. The shawl was still folded neatly on the chair, untouched since he gave it to her. As he poured coffee into 2 tin mugs, she reached for it and wrapped it around her shoulders, like it had finally earned its place. They ate bread and smoked meat in silence. She asked what needed doing. He told her. They worked through the morning, chopping and hauling, feeding the horses, mending a hinge on the henhouse. The routine was no longer about survival. It was starting to feel like something else, like home. Around midday, Gideon found her in the lean-to behind the cabin, going through a small wooden chest he hadn't touched in years. He stepped closer, stiffening, but she didn't open it, just sat with one hand on the lid, her fingers resting on the worn carvings. He stood behind her. "That was hers," he said. "My wife's." Tiva didn't turn. "You kept her things?" He nodded slowly. Didn't know what else to do with them. She looked over her shoulder. "Do you want me not to touch them?" He shook his head. "No, it's all right." She hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside were folded shawls, a hairbrush, a small Bible, a dried bouquet tied with faded ribbon. On top of it all was a photograph, black and white, the edges curled. A woman with light hair standing beside a small boy with a crooked smile. Tiva held it up gently. "Your son." He nodded. "Micah. He was 6 when he fell from the bluff." Her hand didn't tremble, but her breath did. "I lost a brother to the river. He was 8. We never found him." They didn't speak for a while. The wind picked up outside again. The chickens scratched in the snow near the barn. Tiva set the photograph back, slowly closed the lid, and stood. "I won't take space that belongs to her." Gideon looked at her hard then. "You're not taking anything." She held his eyes. "I don't want to be a shadow," she said. "You're not," he said with a certainty she hadn't expected. That night, they sat closer at the fire. The silence between them had changed again. Thicker, quieter. Not tense, but waiting. He reached out and handed her a small comb, the one that had belonged to his wife. She looked at it, then at him. "You wanted me to have this?" He nodded. She held it to her chest, then set it gently beside her, brushing a few strands of hair back with her fingers. The fire lit her skin in warm tones, shadows dancing across her arms and collarbone. The neckline of the dress had slipped lower again from wear, showing more than it should have. But she didn't pull it up this time. He didn't look away. She didn't hide. Later, when she went to the cot, she paused by his chair. He looked up. This time she didn't kiss his cheek. She leaned forward and touched her lips to his, soft and slow, just once. When she pulled back, her eyes stayed on his. He didn't speak, didn't move, but his hand lifted and he gently touched her wrist. Only for a second, only to let her know he was still there. Then she turned and walked to bed. The fire burned low. The wind rose and fell again. And for the first time in years, Gideon Kane closed his eyes, not to forget, but to remember the way her lips felt when she chose to stay. By the time the snow began to melt off the ridge, something had settled between them. Quiet, unspoken, but steady. The work continued as always. Feed the horses, split the logs, patch what the cold had warped. But the rhythm was no longer just for survival. It was a routine that held meaning now. 2 people choosing the same place each day, staying. Tiva moved through the cabin like she belonged because by then she did. She spoke more English, asked more questions, laughed once or twice when Gideon stumbled over the Apache word that she asked him to learn. He didn't laugh back, but she saw the warmth behind his quiet, saw the way he watched her when she wasn't looking. She knew now he wasn't the kind of man who asked for closeness, but he didn't turn away either. Not anymore. That morning after breakfast, she stepped outside while he was tending to the chickens. The sun was pale behind thin clouds, the ground still frozen in patches. She had washed the dress 2 nights before and now wore it freshly dried, softer from the washing. It hung gently off her body, the neckline torn slightly lower from wear, her curves more visible beneath the fabric. She didn't hide herself now. Not from him. She stood on the porch barefoot for a moment, soaking in the cold air before stepping down into the snow and heading toward the barn. Inside, Gideon was finishing with the feed. When he turned and saw her, his eyes held steady on her form, not just the way the dress clung to her hips or the bare length of leg exposed when she stepped up onto the low beam near the stall, but something deeper, the way she looked back at him now, with trust, with calm, without fear. She spoke first. "You said once this place was only for the dead." He wiped his hands on a rag, leaned back against the stall door. "I did." "It's not anymore," she said. He nodded once, quiet, honest. No, it's not. She walked over and stood in front of him, her fingers brushing the wooden edge of the stall. Do you want me here, Gideon? Truly? He didn't move, just looked her square in the eyes. I wouldn't let you stay if I didn't. Even if I hadn't touched you or kissed you, I'd still want you here. She nodded slowly, eyes never leaving his. And if I did more than kiss you? A long beat of silence stretched between them. His chest rose once, slowly. He reached out, not fast, not rough, and touched her cheek. His thumb brushed a strand of hair from her jaw. I won't take anything you don't give freely, he said. I know that, she answered. Her hand came up, rested lightly on his chest. She could feel the rhythm of his heart through his shirt. It was steady, slow. Then I'm giving, she whispered. They didn't speak again. He lifted her gently, slowly. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders as he carried her through the back of the barn, up the loft ladder. The old hay was dry, a bed of quilts nearby for nights he stayed out with the animals. She lay back onto them, without fear. The dress slipped off her shoulder, her legs tangled beneath his, her skin, scarred and soft, pressed against his, without hesitation. They made love without noise, without rush. He touched her like she wasn't broken, like she never had been. She held him like she didn't need to fight anymore. His hands didn't tremble, hers didn't flinch. When it was done, they lay side by side, her head on his chest, his fingers brushing through her hair. The snow outside had begun to fall again, light and silent. The rafters creaked in the wind. You don't have to be anything here, he said, after a long while. I know, she said, but I want to be yours. He closed his eyes, pulled her closer. You already are. They stayed in the loft until the sun began to dip, neither speaking more than a few words. And when they finally climbed down, she slipped her hand into his and didn't let go. That night, she didn't go to the cot. She went to his bed and the fire burned long, and the silence between them felt whole. The days grew longer, the sun rising earlier now, warming the snow into slush and soaking the ground beneath it. Winter was loosening its grip on the valley. The cold still came at night, but in the mornings there was birdsong again, and the creek down past the cottonwoods had begun to trickle over ice-cracked stone. Tiva no longer used the cot. Her shawl now hung beside Gideon's coat. Her boots sat next to his by the door. No one said it out loud, but it was clear she lived there, not as a guest, not as a debt, as a partner. She had begun tending more than just the animals. She'd taken over the hearth, the bread baking, the mending, even some of the ledgers when Gideon showed her how. Her handwriting was clean, deliberate. She learned fast, and though the people in town had not seen her since the day she was bought from the stock pen, word had reached the postmaster and feed clerk. Whispers carried far in places like Lobo Crossing. Some said the quiet rancher had lost his mind, taken in a savage woman. Others said she bewitched him, but none of them dared say it to his face. That morning, as Gideon checked the fence line, Tiva stood barefoot on the porch, the rising sun on her face. She looked toward the ridge where the two graves sat beneath the cottonwood. She hadn't gone there yet, not out of fear, out of respect, but something in her told her it was time. She waited until Gideon returned. His coat was dusted with frost, his boots mud-caked, jaw stubbled from 3 days without shaving. I want to see them, she said simply. He didn't ask who, just nodded. They walked in silence up the trail that twisted along the ridge. At the top, the snow had mostly cleared, revealing the old fence posts and the stones, simple markers, no names carved, just smooth river rocks, stacked with care and held in place with iron nails to keep scavengers off. Tiva stood between them, her hands at her sides. This one, she asked, pointing to the left. He nodded. My son, Micah. She knelt beside it, fingers brushing the cold stone. I would have fed him, she said quietly. Taught him stories. Gideon didn't speak. His throat tightened. He hadn't cried in 5 years, but something in her words cut through the wall inside him. She didn't mourn with drama or pity. She simply saw what was missing and offered herself as if she'd always been there. When she stood, she looked at him. Do they rest easy now? I think so, he said. I think they would have liked you. That night, as she combed her hair by the hearth, she turned to him and asked, Will I meet trouble in town? He paused at the question, then answered truthfully. Maybe, But you're not alone. She nodded. I want fabric for new dresses. I want to choose what I wear now. He gave the faintest smile. Then we'll ride in spring. She stepped closer, hands smoothing over the front of his shirt. And what will they say? Let them talk, he said. I know who you are. Her lips pressed to his neck, slow and sure. That night, under the thick quilts, she lay curled into him, one leg over his, her hand on his chest. Do you want children again? She asked, her voice low, steady. He hesitated. If it happens. She looked up at him. Then I'll stay long enough to see if it does. He pulled her tighter. You're not staying because of a child, Tiva. I know. I'm staying because I have a place here with you. Outside, the snow melted quietly in the dark. Inside, they stayed in each other's arms. And for the first time, neither of them was wondering if the other would leave. The thought came slow but sure. By late March, the roads out of Lobo Crossing were mud instead of snow, and the cattle could be heard lowing in the southern pastures again. The ranch, once buried in silence and frost, came alive with the sound of creaking wood, dripping water, and the steady rhythm of labor. Tiva moved through it all like she had always belonged. Her step had weight now, confidence, not just survival. She wore her new dress, one she had sewn from dark blue calico Gideon found in the back of the storage trunk. It fit her better than the last, cut to her shape. The neckline was modest, but still low enough that when she leaned over the table to knead dough or reach for the upper shelf in the pantry, the curve of her chest showed through. She didn't hide it. He didn't leer. It had simply become part of the quiet adult world they now shared. The morning began with routine. Gideon had gone out to break the last of the ice from the troughs. Tiva prepared breakfast, cornbread, black beans, a slice of dried meat. When he returned, she was waiting by the fire, arms crossed, something unreadable in her face. He noticed right away. What is it? He asked. She held something in her hand, a small cloth bundle. I was late, she said. He tilted his head. Late? My moon, she clarified. The words settled between them like dust. Gideon looked at her, searching her face, not with panic, but with something more like steadiness. He stepped forward, took the bundle from her, opened it, a piece of dried yarrow wrapped carefully. Old medicine, woman's medicine. You're sure? He asked, voice low. She nodded once. Did you want it? She didn't answer right away. Then, I didn't know if I could, not after what was done to me, but now, if it's real, then yes, I want this. He exhaled slowly, walked to the stove, poured hot water into the same chipped tin cup he always used, passed it to her. We'll find out together. She sat with him, and for a long time, neither one said anything. The fire cracked. The wind pushed gently at the shutters. There was no fear in the room, just a strange kind of calm. Later that afternoon, Gideon went into town for the first time in weeks. He needed flour, salt, and a new latch for the barn door. Tiva asked to stay behind. He hesitated, but she gave him a look that said she wasn't afraid anymore. So he left. When he returned, saddlebags full, his shoulders stiff from the ride, he found the cabin swept clean, the dog fed, and Tiva sitting at the table with 2 cups waiting. You came back, she said. He furrowed his brow. Why wouldn't I? She looked down. I've been left before. He stepped forward, pulled out a small wrapped bundle from his coat, placed it on the table. She opened it carefully. Inside was a pair of soft leather moccasins, smaller than hers, new. For the child, he said. Tiva didn't speak. She reached across the table and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, her grip strong. That night, as they lay in bed, her head on his chest, she asked, If it is a boy, will you name him Micah again? No, he said quietly. This one gets his own name. And if it's a girl? He was silent for a moment. We'll choose together. She smiled into his shoulder, a quiet, content smile full of strength. And when she slept, he stayed awake a while, hand resting on her waist, feeling the rise and fall of her breath. There was no more guessing, no more wondering if she would stay, no more past that needed escaping. Everything they'd lost had not disappeared, but something new had begun to take root, steady as spring. And this time, neither of them had to survive alone. By the time spring fully settled into the valley, the snow had vanished from the ridgeline. The earth turned soft beneath their boots, and green had begun to push through the soil like something remembered after a long silence. The creek ran fast now, swollen with meltwater, and the cottonwood above the graves had begun to bud again. The ranch breathed differently. So did they. Tiva moved slower now, not from injury, not from fear, but because her body had changed. Her hand often rested just below her stomach when she walked, even before it began to show. She said nothing dramatic about it. She simply adjusted to the new pace. She slept longer in the mornings. Her appetite grew. Her silences deepened, but now they felt full instead of guarded. Gideon noticed everything. The way her back stiffened slightly when she lifted the kettle, the way her eyes followed his hand when he reached toward her in the night. She had come into his life as a stranger, refusing to kneel. And now, months later, she carried their child beneath her ribs and looked at him as if she'd always known he'd be the one to hold her through it. On the first clear day of May, he took her into town. She dressed in the blue calico again, shawl around her shoulders, her braid looped low and tight. Gideon hitched the wagon with care. The townsfolk didn't say much as they passed through. Mostly stares, a few whispered words, but no one dared speak against him directly. He walked beside her, his hand always near hers, never clutching, just there, solid. At the general store, she chose fabrics, spoke softly with the clerk, asked about thimbles and threads, examined patterns in silence. Gideon watched from the corner, arms folded, as she ran her fingers over the bolts of cloth like someone remembering the feel of dignity. A few women glanced at her, curiosity in their eyes, but not cruelty. One offered a slight smile. Tiva nodded back. They didn't stay long. Back at the ranch, as the sun dipped low, Tiva carried the folded fabric to the table, laid it out, and began to cut. She worked slowly, her motion sure. She was sewing for the future now, for herself, for the child. Gideon brought her water, watched her work, didn't interrupt. That evening after supper, they sat together on the porch. The wind was soft, the hills green, the air smelled of pine and damp soil. She leaned into him, her head resting beneath his guano, and he wrapped an arm around her, fingers grazing her shoulder. "I never thought I'd have this," she said. "Not after what they did." He didn't speak right away. Then, "It didn't take you from yourself. You held on." She looked up at him. "You didn't fix me. I didn't try. That's why I healed." They stayed there, lurking long after the sun fell. When the stars came out, she whispered, "Do you want to marry me, Gideon?" His hand tightened just slightly on her arm. Jati said, "But only if you want to carry my name, because it's yours now, not because I saved you." She turned to face him fully. "You didn't save me. You saw me. That's more." He stood, went inside, returned with a simple silver ring, one that had belonged to his mother untouched for years. He didn't kneel, didn't make a speech, simply offered it to her. She slipped it on her finger. It fit. That night, as they lay beneath the covers, her back pressed to his chest, his hand resting over her stomach, they spoke of names for the child, of the fence they would build for a garden, of paint for the cabin, of a swing hung under the cottonwood tree. And when the fire died low and the room fell into stillness, neither of them feared the quiet anymore. The woman once called worthless now lay safe in a warm bed beside the man who never once asked her to bow. Her scars had not vanished, and his grief had not disappeared. But they had chosen to stay, and in that choice they had built a life, a real one, a shared one. And in the dark, with the spring wind rustling the windows, it was clear she was never going to be sold again. She was home, and she was his, not as property, but as family, forever. The story of Tiva and Gideon and all the slaves were sold offers a profound lesson about the transformative power of compassion and choice in healing broken souls. Tiva, a woman deemed worthless and discarded, and Gideon, a man hardened by loss, find redemption not through grand gestures but through quiet, deliberate acts of respect and understanding. Their journey teaches us that true healing begins when we see others not as objects or burdens, but as equals deserving of dignity. Tiva's refusal to kneel, even in the face of brutality, and Gideon's choice to offer her a hand without expectation remind us that strength lies in standing tall and that love grows from freedom, not possession. Their bond, forged through shared silence, mutual work, and unforced trust, shows that the deepest connections are built when we allow others to choose us just as we choose them. This story stirs the heart, urging us to reflect on how we treat those society casts aside and how we can offer a space for healing in our own lives. It's a call to embrace empathy, to recognize that every soul carries scars, and to believe that even in the coldest winters, warmth can take root. What does this story teach you about compassion or resilience? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how Tiva and Gideon's journey resonates with you. If this tale moved you, hit that subscribe button and join our community for more stories that inspire and uplift. Let's keep the conversation going and spread the power of these lessons together.